Hey guys, this is Gotta Love Breath. My friend came over for a couple of days, and so that totally awesome blocking schedule I had got thrown out the door. So now I have back, and now I have a whole list of topics. I made an entire list of things that I would like to talk about that sound totally awesome for you guys coming up here. But first, I figured I would do another one of my, what I would like to call the reviewed very poorly segments. And these are basically me rambling on and on about whatever movie I just saw. And usually, just for a warning, I have a love-hate relationships with movies. Usually I either love them or I hate them because I'm extremely picky. I love movies. Movies are my number one thing, so whenever I see something that disappoints me, it usually freaks the hell out of me. And whenever I see something that lives up to my expectations or exceeds them, I tend to blow it a bit out of proportion. So I went to go see Where the Wild Things Are, directed by Spike Jonze, who's now one of my heroes, by the way. I need to build an altar of Spike Jonze somewhere in my rooms with burning candles, and I still need to see Being John Malkovich. But we'll have burning purple candles next to him, and maybe a Spike Jonze hug pillow somewhere. An inflatable Spike Jonze with... yeah, no, never mind. No inflatable Spike Jonze. Oh my god, where my mind can go sometimes. Okay, anyways. This film was directed by Spike Jonze, and it's obviously based off of the book written by Maurice Sendak, which was made back in the 60s. And this film hit me, absolutely just ripped my heart out. It was something, it's the kind of movie I walked out of. I was in the theater trying to hold back sobs by the end. And for the life of me, I can't possibly describe why exactly I was in the state I was when watching it. For some reason, this movie hit me like a ton of bricks. For one thing, it so perfectly for me encapsulated a lot of the harshness of childhood, which people tend to forget or people tend to overlook. The fact that children actually go through just as much pain and, in my opinion, are just as psychologically complex as adults. It's just that they're assimilating to the world around them. And once the real world starts creeping in, sometimes for some children, including myself growing up, it tends to freak you out when you realize that there's a real world around you, and you have to get used to the fact that things aren't always going to be perfect. You can't always have a world where only the things you want to happen will happen. That's just completely unachievable. So Max is basically a little demon boy at the beginning in this movie. I mean, he's chasing the dog around the house. He pounces it to the ground like a WWF wrestler. I mean, it's pretty intense stuff at the beginning. I was like, almost kind of like, oh my god. I mean, I respect the fact that he went in the direction that he did, but he is not a good kid. And I feel it makes the movie even more poignant when it ends up that he does go through an emotional change. He does change from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. He starts off as not entirely despicable. I mean, he's just a kid. He's an 8-year-old kid who's having a rough time and runs away from home and bites his mother while he's at it. Yes, he does bite his mother in a rather extreme scene, which was a little... Again, I was a little bit on edge. There's scenes in this movie, which this is especially something for children's cinema that I've got to, again, get down to my hands and knees for Spike Jonze and hug my Spike Jonze hug pillow, because there are scenes in this movie that are awkward, that are scary, that are intense. It's stuff that often just gets glanced over in cinema that's aimed at children. And there's been the argument that this film is in fact not a children's film, but a film about childhood, which I have to disagree somewhat here. The themes and everything in this film are no stronger than they were in E.T. The violence is no stronger than it is in E.T. This is just going back to real cinema for children. This is not a film that talks down to kids. This is a film that is built for all audiences, for everybody to get a bit out of it. It's not just made with pop culture references and cute little jokes here and there to make your little kids giggle and to keep you somewhat moderately entertained as Shrek does another fart. This is a real, genuine film. And it's a very artsy film. It's artistically crafted. And the cinematography, my god, that cinematography is brilliant. I mean, this movie is just absolutely balls to the walls gorgeous. You look at these environments that these wild things are in, and they're just these really beautiful forests. I think they filmed it in Australia. I believe I read the making of just like a week ago, but they filmed them on these very pretty natural locations. There's very minimal use of CGI, and it shows. The only thing that's really CGI in this movie is occasionally the wild things will do something or will be animated in a way that can only be done with CGI. For instance, you can tell that their faces were obviously computer enhanced. But besides that, they pretty much stay with normal tricks. The tricks of the trade that were used like all the way back in the 80s with Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. This brings me back to the Jim Henson era, when you didn't have to have like giant CGI creatures and insane action sequences to make a children's film. This is a very intimate character study of one boy named Max, and it's about his fears in the world. It's about everything that makes him happy, everything that he's frightened of. It embodies childhood. This film is about childhood. It's more so about childhood than it is just about a singular child. And it hit me. There were so many sequences where my heart sank because I could relate to it. I had had these sort of experiences as a kid, and him running off into his little fantasy world where the wild things are. By the way, the island, all of this is pretty much in his head. They don't say it straight out, but any adult entering the cinema will probably be able to guess that none of this is really real, and it's all going on in his head the very moment he gets on the boat. I can relate to that. When I was a kid, whenever I ran across hard times, or whenever I was really bored, actually, I would escape into my own little sci-fi space opera epic. No joke, I would delve into it. You get inside of this world where only the things you want to happen will happen. That inside of your mind, you have this wonderful landscape, and you just go wild in it. Or at least I did. I remember having fantasies about Star Wars, Star Trek, all that kind of crazy sci-fi stuff that I grew up with. And to see that represented on film, but not done in the typical Hollywood fashion, which is everything is sunshine and roses and everything is happy in the end, and that children are either saints or devil children, that there's no in-between, that a child can't be just a child. It hit me. It was beautiful. This movie, I can't lavish enough praise on the pacing of the film, the way the film was shot, the music, because the soundtrack was brilliant. It was done by Karen O and the Kids. And they're like an indie rock band. But Spike Jonze signed them on to do the soundtrack for the film. And there's songs in this that I've listened to frequently after I saw the film that bring me back to a point of innocence. And that's how I felt throughout this entire film. It's bringing me back to that point of being a child, but not necessarily in a entirely perfect way. It brings me back to being a child in a realistic sense of saying, yeah, childhood wasn't all that particularly great. There were some harsh points, but there's this optimism and this glowing energy that comes with being a child that I felt radiated through this film, especially near the end, where he finally realizes just how bad of a kid he had been acting, and the fact that he does need to return back home because he loves his mother and his mother loves him. That is, oh my God, just the final scene in this film. I was in the men's restroom sobbing for the next 10 minutes. I am a wuss. I sob in the men's restroom all the time after a movie that hits me, but I haven't sobbed like this in the longest freaking time. I would give this my highest recommendation, except I will take into account this. This film is only going to appeal to people, I think, who have gone through similar childhood experiences. It's a little slow-paced. There isn't much of a traditional plot. And I don't see that as a flaw, though. Lots of people have pointed out as being there needed to be more story. No, the story is about growing up, and it's about the sorts of things that kids do. It doesn't need an epic adventure with him and the wild things. That's exactly what this film was trying to avoid. This is a pure film. It's moody. It's atmospheric. Some people aren't going to get into that. It may not be your cup of tea, but for me, it was completely just from my first cinematic experience, a 5-star. I loved the hell out of the movie. If I were to give it a serious rating, not just my own, based off my own personal experience, I would probably give it a 4, because I recognize the flaws that people see within the film as far as the pacing is concerned, but they didn't bother me any. I think it's just something you need to acknowledge before you go into the cinema. Like, is this my type of movie? Anyways, I need to cut this short. Okay, bye-bye. Go see it. When it comes out on DVD, maybe rent it if you don't feel like going to go see it. But either way, see it. It's well worth your time, hopefully.